This panel is about the changes that social media and other recent forms of technology have had upon the practice of art criticism, or we might want to call it more broadly arts writing. And in order to do that, I'm going to just ask the panelists a little bit about their practice as critics or online writers, if you want to say, to get the ball rolling and then lead that into a general discussion. Could we get the first slide? It should be Laura's. Yeah. So this is very anodyne, I suppose. It's Laura McLean-Ferris's Twitter page. Laura, as you know, is a writer and curator. I should also mention that she has on Facebook 1,259 friends, on Twitter 7,539 followers, and on Instagram 927 followers. Whoa. Just to give you a sense of scale for the whole panel. Laura, I wanted to ask you about a couple things. We had a bit of an exchange before, and the first thing, well, first of all, I thought it was interesting that you described yourself. You said, I struggle to see how my own personal social media feeds have anything that's exciting to say. They're very, quote, average user. So I'm interested in this question of the average user as a critic and curator. What would that mean to you? But I'm also really interested in this point you brought up. You were quoting an article by Jan Verwoerd that was published in Moose, and you mentioned that you said that he argued that the art world has cultivated a very polite, civilized form of criticism, which is empathetic, and this is a good thing, meaning he said that. But the upshot, he says, is that the impolite or nasty forms of criticism have found their way out there somewhere, and he believes this is aired in gossip. Now, in this original article, he was talking about gossip like after a show's opening, people meet, and then they bitch about the show to one another. But then in criticism, in let's say art form or something, it's much more polite. You said, I'm not entirely sure I agree with, but it's an interesting counterpoint. Perhaps with respect to social media, this takes the form of bitchy Instagram accounts and Twitter feeds. So I guess first I want to ask about the average user, but then I also want to ask about this polite versus impolite criticism. Like, how do you see yourself as a critic fitting into that? And what does it mean for criticism what has the internet done to this balance of polite and impolite?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did actually rethink my my statement about my own social media accounts in light of this conversation, because I do think they are a little bit dull in a certain way. And I think the legacy of that actually is from my time as a freelance writer and feeling, very unprotected and unsupported, and like I wasn't sure who my audience was, or, if someone read me like in a national newspaper in the UK, they would think that I was a newspaper critic, not like a kind of serious kind of theoretical art world critic, this kind of thing. So I just like, this just aggregated my articles and gave me a place to share them, and I didn't really do much more than that on there. It's not like I don't think that a lot more can be done with that space, but yeah, it was just, Twitter or something like this was just mainly like a link sharing device for me. But I did think about the way that my use of Twitter as something, or other social media as chiefly, a slightly dull form of public relations, has influenced the way I read all of those kind of the way that I read social media as not chiefly about public relations, but I think a lot about how public relations is really important to the way people use social media, and that often people are kind of like performing something or selling something, and particularly from my time as a freelancer, I felt like this was the way that I used it. Back to the Jan Verwoerd idea. I wrote an article about the fact that I felt like criticism was becoming increasingly fraught in an age in which everyone is very interconnected, and they can all see who's friends with who, and they have some visibility of maybe the artist that they're writing about, and that artist's friends, and that means that particularly negative criticism becomes a little bit more fraught. So I guess I wrote a piece kind of exploring this, and then found this piece by Jan, which explains that this has always been, to some extent, the situation within the art world in which the critic isn't sitting in the audience of a Lady Gaga concert and is never going to meet her. Critics and artists and curators and collectors and all this kind of thing share space with each other all the time, and have some level of understanding of who is friends with who and so on. But I do think that just to finish this, I do think that negative criticism, negative positive is the wrong way to put it, but I think that genuine critique is a little bit more difficult in this situation, and that's something that I'm interested in thinking about and talking about further.
Yeah, I think we can return to that further, and I also want to maybe have the panelists think about what would constitute critique. Criticism, as someone who's also a critic, criticism isn't simply about saying this is good, this is bad, although that's part of it. Evaluation is part of it, also appreciation, explanation, and so forth, and promotion, as you said. Kimberly, I'd like to talk to you. You're the online community producer for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in addition to being very well known as the founder of Black Contemporary Art, an online space that began on Tumblr, right?
Yeah.
Originally?
Yeah, sorry, I was scared what you were going to pull up.
As well you should be. Just to give a little statistics here, on your personal Facebook, you have 2,455 friends and 641 followers. On Twitter, you have 5,720 followers. On Instagram, an impressive 95.6K followers. Black Contemporary Art's Tumblr, I don't have statistics on. I assume it's very popular. But Black Contemporary Art's own Twitter has 7,414 followers. So I actually pulled out a post that is, I wouldn't say atypical of what you put online, but you have this interesting interplay between Black Contemporary Art as a platform, which is not equal to you, and your personal accounts, and they intersect so much. This is from a personal account, and what I found was interesting about it is that Black Contemporary Art as a project is very affirmative. It's very kind of, I want to create a space to discuss things that are not being discussed otherwise and have a single place for that. But in your personal account, you tend to have bits of criticism like this. So I guess I wanted to ask you about that relationship between this kind of self-made institutional voice, which I guess you could call it for Black Contemporary Art, your personal voice, and now a third voice, which is that you actually work for a physical institution. So how do you manage those three things? What goes on in your head trying to figure out the relationship between these three voices?
Yeah, a lot of developing my professional social media voice has been kind of this process of maturation. So when I started Black Contemporary Art in 2011, it was at the very beginning of my understanding of art history. I've always been in museums, I've always been in proximity to art, but I started the blog and knew that I didn't know a lot, and so I started it on Tumblr as a site for education. So I started the blog to actually learn. I didn't think anyone was gonna follow it. I just wanted to have a repository for the images that I thought should be out in the world, because I went on this quest to find something like it, didn't find it, and so I just started making it. And now, 5 years later, the blog is turning 5 next month, I feel a little bit more confident about developing my own voice. But I do always, just being a Black woman in the art world, I think about the way that my tone is policed constantly. And so this coming up, I'm like, I don't know if this is the thing. But now I've just been kind of trying more to really own it, because it's a sound critique. It's like we get those emails, those year-end emails every year. It's like these beautiful Black children who have no names, and they're supposed to bring tens of thousands of dollars to these organizations that, I like to think that they care about them, but they really are taking these pictures to make money off of them. So how then do you critique that without then being an angry Black woman? Right. And that's something that I'm constantly thinking about.
Is this a subtweet to a specific instance, or were you speaking generally? Because I feel like one interesting thing about the critique is that you wonder when you read it, is she subtweeting something she specifically got? Or, I'm just asking you that now.
Yeah, I think it's on the person who reads it. If you feel guilty, you probably did it. And that's your cross to bear. That's not mine.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess what would you consider yourself a critic then? I mean, you're on the panel full of people who are professionally thought of as critics. That's not your professional cognomen.
No.
But this to me is this is a piece of institutional criticism. I mean, it may be a fragment, it may be a bit of, but nonetheless, you are critiquing the institution publicly in writing to a very large readership. So, yeah.
I'd have to disagree. I'm just paying attention.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like it happens, and I responded to it.
Yeah.
It's not this like activist impulse. Like now that I've actually started to develop my voice and tell people what I think, everyone's like, "Oh, Kim, the activist." It's like I'm not an activist.
Right.
I center on my identity, and I respond to the things that I see.
Right.
It's simple. It's just an observation. It just happens to be a raised observation.
Right. Although to push back on that, I don't think that that's very different from what a lot of critics do in their writing. I mean, Jerry might also say that what he does is an observation, even when he's saying something is.
But it's not an activist impulse. When Jerry sees a show and doesn't like it, it's not because Jerry's an activist. You know what I'm saying?
It depends on how you define an activist. I mean, he can respond to that later, but I mean, he does bring up things like.
I mean, Jerry's probably not the best example for that. Just,
but
if
I
anyone
guess,
knows, you know.
This is getting to the whole idea of what do we think of criticism nowadays. And I mean, I didn't raise the term activism, you did.
Yeah.
I just said it was a critique.
Yeah. That was just my thing I wanted to say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we move on to who do I have next? Jerry. Yeah. Perfect segue. And then we can return to that question. Now, Jerry, many people in the audience may know who you are. Since 2006, you've been the senior art critic and columnist for New York Magazine, formerly senior art critic for the Village Voice. But I do want to say, let's reset this. Give you some numbers. Facebook, you have 4,791 friends.
No,
yes.
I have 70.
No. I looked it on today.
It's the the friends.
Sorry, the friends. You have 70,479 followers, however. On Twitter, you have 789 followers.
No, it's 71.
71,000. 71,000. I don't hate you, but I haven't memorized your own statistics as much as you obviously have. On Instagram, you have 146,000 followers, not specific. So just to mention some of the things you've done online and the social media accounts, which you've gotten a lot of attention for and people seem to love. It's you've posted an image of your bank account to show that you weren't a one percenter, right? You burned your MoMA press pass and put it on Twitter. I believe this was after the Bjork show, right? Was that the
After
connection?
some
MoMA thing.
I love MoMA.
Yeah, and you also you post a lot of images of art with genitalia and so forth. I guess I want to go right to the question of polite versus impolite criticism back to you. Like you are someone that speaks. I mean, as a critic, maybe it's generational, perhaps. I'd like to raise that question. You're known for being very forthright in your opinion in your writing. So how do you see this balance online? How do you see what you're doing online and its extension of? How do you see this as an extension of your criticism? I should ask.
Well, I think it's all part of the same ball of wax. I don't divide one thing from another and another from another. I would like to think that there's this sort of freedom or sprawl to use any tool that might come along to use. I accidentally did it with Facebook, where one day, for no reason, instead of like 5, 6, 8, 10 years ago, whenever it was, just instead of writing what the weather was, I wrote, I really don't like Marlene Dumas' current show at David's Werner.
That was on Facebook?
Yeah, I think it's one of the first times, and I had 10,000 new assholes torn for me in the first hour. And instantly what occurred to me as I was sitting at home, other than a constant sense, and I still get this, when you guys attacked me yesterday and asked for my Facebook and Instagram to be turned off.
Who said
because, Facebook sent me 50 protests that I had endorsed Hillary Clinton. Because I'm a geezer, I understand. And they were very upset and felt that I was a one percenter. And this comes back to the other issues of policing. When we say enough is enough, I think we better be damn careful. I wrote a really positive review of Carol Walker. In that review, I happened to mention I loved that big sugar thing she did out there in Brooklyn so much that I thought it should be made into a big parade float and brought back and forth across America for 10 years. I was really attacked for that. Everybody said, you haven't respected her well enough. You're dissing her. And I was called a racist over and over, a lot of letters written about it. And luckily, Carol Walker comes on my damn whatever it was and said, I like it. But that really didn't stop it. And it happens a lot, let me just tell you. But that's okay. I think I'm sort of wandering because I'm not sure what the question is. I don't think there's such a, I think that I'm shocked that more writers don't put more online because you can be activists. I ask for raises for you online, don't I? Mm-hmm. Don't I?
Yeah, you do.
To her boss. I go, she's doing good. Why don't you give her more money? If that's not activist, you know, or that, you know, MoMA just saying, we listened to all that idiot, hysterical yelling I and a few other people did about the Diller-Scofidio black box and the gray box. I'm not saying I'm smart, because I know I'm not. I don't have any degrees. I may be one of the only people in the room that doesn't. I didn't go to school. I'm the oldest person here. But how did that happen? I'm 30 inside of me. Anyway, my simple point is I'm only interested in the juice, only interested in opinion, not just what's good and what's bad, but you better back it up, like both of you were saying. Because otherwise, that's just, I love Titanic, I hate Titanic. It's our job, and I think generations of critics in this room, I can't see, but I did see Ben Davis walk in, and a lot of other people in this room are finally escaping, and then I'll stop, the grip of a Mandarin jargon that was taught in academia. I'm sorry, I love you all. I think you have to go to school these days. It's important. I'm good with that. I'm jealous of you. But and it killed about 4 generations of critics, and I'm sorry. And my perception is there's fantastic criticism online. Fantastic. And it'll only get more. I'm not paid a dime when I write for it. So we have nothing to lose. We're finally dangerous. Since there is no money for anyone in this room to do what they do. No money, except for like a few white men that make a lot of money in the art world, so fuck them, fuck us, whatever. I don't care. I want everyone to make money. Since we're not gonna make money anyway, there's nothing to lose. Sorry. I'm not gonna talk anymore.
No, you definitely better talk some more. All right, and finally, Brian, you're a writer and associate editor of Art in America, and you're also very well known for using a form of social media as an extension of your criticism. This is your Yelp profile, Brian D's Yelp profile. You've posted to date, you have 59 friends on Yelp, and you've posted 105 reviews. On other media, you have 2,401 friends on Facebook, 4,740 followers on Twitter, and 64.5K followers on Instagram. However, you say that Constant Dullart bought your followers through some sort of scam, I suppose. But I do want to bring up a question about your Yelp reviews. You know, I run a space called Light Industry in Brooklyn, and our only Yelp review is from you. And it's a 2-star Yelp review in which you make some claims that are actually not true about our programming. You say that we didn't show electronic art for several years when we did, and that we only show structural film, which is critically incorrect. So I guess the question is, but then I wanted to use it as the photo on this panel, and you wouldn't let me. So I wonder, the question is like, why? Because you said it was too confrontational. So why is it okay to put something online that's confrontational, but not okay for us to sit here like we do at parties and see each other all the time at Rhizome things? Why is that okay and this isn't? That's my question.
Well, I think this panel is not about you or light industry, so that's why I didn't really want to talk about it.
No, actually, I don't want to talk about light industry. I want to talk about this idea of it was too confrontational. Why is putting something online? I mean, light industry is not the
No,
only thing.
I mean, it's not that it's confrontational. I just felt like it's not really representative. I mean, most of my reviews, as you can see from the stats here, are very positive. It's just like the spaces that I really don't like, I give them, 1 or 2 star reviews, and that's like a small minority.
Well, it was also, I mean, I should also mention that you posted the review after you pitched a show to us that we didn't want. But anyways, there's another, here's another review for Jason Mussin's show. I didn't spend, this is from last
So
year.
I'm just going to say most
You wanna
of my
talk over
reviews
me?
are 4 or 5 star reviews, and I think it's weird that you're picking ones that are not really representative of what my reviews are like. And I would rather just talk more about Yelp in general rather than like focus on certain,
Sure. I mean,
instances.
why would you extend your practice to Yelp, and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, there are a few reasons. I mean, for one thing, it was thank you. It was a way to play with a more playful and like personal, immediate voice in my critical writing, because when you're writing about art, it's very easy to slip into stiffness, and I wanted to overcome that. Secondly, it was a kind of humorous institutional critique. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with Brian O'Doherty's critique of the white cube as a space that is, isolates art, cuts it off from the real world, puts it in the semi-sacred white space that is kind of depersonalized and objective. And the way people write on Yelp is extremely subjective. It's about a kind of embodied experience, and so I thought mashing those two up is, was kind of funny, but it also says some very real things about the way people experience art. And then finally, I thought of it as a reflection on the position of the art critic. Especially when I started it, I was a freelancer, and so I felt like very powerless. And I was thinking about how the people who really set the agenda in the art world are not critics, they're dealers and institutional curators. And so much of art writing is just kind of affirming these structures of power that already exist or already givens. And I was like making an analogy between that and the user who is kind of, affirming the existence of things like Yelp and Facebook just by writing all of this text for no compensation. And, other people are making money off of this, harvesting data. And that's because they're, kind of capitalizing on people's desire to share their ideas and share their experiences. Yeah, that's what it's about.
Okay. So how would one know that from reading one of your Yelp reviews? Or would someone have to go to a talk you gave to explain? Because I guess what I'm saying is online, any Yelp review on any site just appears as one of many Yelp reviews and is almost invisible as a piece of criticism. But you're now saying that what it's doing, the work it's doing, is actually undermining some sort of normal criticism. But how does that happen?
Well, I think
Where does it happen, I should
with
say?
social media in general, I mean, it's not really like writing something for print where each utterance is a kind of whole object in itself. And so I think what you're doing by taking people's one tweet is sort of misunderstanding what social media is about, because social media is something that happens over time. So if people sort of read my Yelp reviews over time as I'm writing them, then I think they might get that sense. And I would say also, the voice I use in them, especially like in my positive reviews, it has this kind of like naive sense of wonder about it, and it's sort of about like what makes people love art, why people want to write about it in the first place. So I'd say, that's one answer to your question. But also, yeah, it's a kind of thing that happens over time, and so it's not really about like isolated reviews. Some people say, oh, you should put those in a book, but I mean, they're so bad, the writing in them is terrible, and I would not want that to like appear in print. Like it belongs on Yelp, and that's kind of the only place where it makes sense.
Right. Okay. So I guess I want to get back to this question, and I want that I raised with Laura to begin with. I want to get, you didn't quite answer to begin with, but pulling up on everything, how do you make a line between polite and impolite now? How do you imagine, like, what is the role of being polite to begin with? Shouldn't critics not be polite?
What is polite?
Well, that's what I want to
ask. I
ask.
don't know what we're talking about.
Well, that's what I want to ask. Because
Okay,
Laura
go
brought
ahead.
up the question immediately, and I want to ask, what is the role of polite criticism, and what do you imagine that is?
What I think, like Robert is saying in that quote, is that that art criticism is perhaps like over careful sometimes. Like you know, so there's lots of language that makes like a very small criticism seem huge. So you can have a review which is you know, has a lot of, which is mainly kind of descriptive and kind and goes into the work and like, you know, stays with the work and pays close attention to it, you know, maybe brings up one critical note. And I think in, you know, in art criticism, this can suddenly seem like a hugely negative review, like a hugely negative statement.
Yeah.
And so you have less of the kind of, you know, the hatchet piece, which is just about, this kind of like fun, like throwdown moment. This is kind of like less common because, you know, because of this awareness and, you know, and empathy with artists, because, you know, often critics are, and, you know, writers and curators are spending a lot of time with artists and thinking what it means to kind of make work and be with them. So that, I think that's what I mean by this kind of politeness. There are other words for it. There's like art language, there's like academia, there's like, you know, this kind of like self-protective humor like angle. But I think what he means by this politeness is just this like awareness of the community that you're speaking to.
Well said.
Yeah, but I also wonder if it has to do with the increase in the amount of art exhibition and the amount of coverage. Because something like Art Forum years ago, I don't really know, I mean, Jerry might answer this well. I feel like it may have published more critical, well, negative, quote, negative or impolite reviews. Now the level of criticism happens on the editorial level where by the editors choosing to write about it or not, it's implicitly endorsing. I mean, just throwing this out there as a question. Implicitly endorsing it by even being written about it at all, so the writing becomes more curatorial than critical in a sense. And then there's the spillover where there's this like, you know, I feel you know, this impulse for critical language on the internet, the spillover is onto comments boards, Twitter, subtweets, because we don't talk about that in criticism as much anymore. I don't know, I'm throwing that out there if people agree with that or not.
I think it's different for all of us. I think maybe, like, say, Jerry, do you maybe have to write about the big show every week? And
I
then
can write about whatever I want. I can say positive or negative. Too many young critics are either lying to me or telling me the truth. I think all of you have written for Art Forum. I haven't. I've never been asked. But that's cool. But a lot of people that write for art magazines now are saying they're asked not to write negative. And I think that that's ridiculous. I think that's a total loss. And has that happened to any of you ever? Once.
One time, but it was, one time.
And I can't really understand a lot of Art Forum, to be honest. I love it as my porn magazine.
Too bad Michelle's not here to answer to this.
What?
Too bad Michelle's not here to answer to this.
No,
Maybe we should leave Art Forum
but
aside.
you guys read or write it, so I would have said it to Michelle. I love it, and it's always been our art magazine. It's probably going to stay that way. But I do wonder, who's it for? How many people are really reading it? And is it maybe a little narrow right now? That's all I'm wondering. I love that it exists. I've never missed an issue. I have all 40 years on my goddamn shelves.
I think it's also a question of the money. Like, I think we can't have this conversation without talking about the gallery machine and talking about ad buys and talking about how those reviews come to be, because it's not just gallery, like people walking around in Chelsea and they see a show and they like it and they write about it. It's just not that simple.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, you know, one of the questions posed to us before was, is social media influencing art criticism? But I think, you know, it's the art market and the museums and nonprofits that legitimize it. They are really like exert a much bigger influence on the kind of art writing that exists, more so than the sort of media that art writing appears in. I mean, the most common genres of art writing are reviews and monographic essays, and those respond directly to demands of those
Monographic
institutions.
essays aren't criticism, though, are they?
Yeah. No,
They're
I'm
paid
saying that
for.
these are kinds of criticism.
Oh.
I don't think those
We
have been
agree.
influenced at all by the internet or social media. I mean, they've
Right.
been the same for decades. So.
We agree, so.
Yeah.
Essays have to be vetted with the artist, with the dealer, with the museum.
Well, not for magazines. I mean,
Not
the
for
museum, maybe.
magazines,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I thought you were talking about, that I published.
No, but I think the monographic essay, like, you know, as a feature in Art Form and Art in America, that is the same kind of thing that would appear in a museum catalog, right? And I think there's...
Kind of, but I think to get back to the money, the other thing, if people aren't critics, you might not know, is that those tend to pay, monographic essays for a catalog tend to pay much more than journalistic writing, and so if you are a journalist, you, by necessity, have to do them in order to make money as a writer, and I think what Jerry's raising is the question if there's a spillover into the style of journalistic writing as well. I guess, I also wanted to ask about responses online. Have you guys had any responses to the writing you've put? I mean, some of you, like, you know, Brian, your work is response in some ways in the Yelp, at least. It's a response to an institution or a response to a show. But what about counter responses from followers? Jerry talked about this a little bit. Does it change what you want to write? Does it change what you might publish, what you might tweet about? Once you've had a kind of cycle of followers responding to you and you come to know the patterns of response, do you change in response to those patterns? Maybe ask him that first, because your rise, I feel like, was very, very fast. And so this is still recent for you, maybe, in terms of your number of followers online. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, could you maybe talk about how the response of those followers changed your activity?
Well, for me, I wouldn't consider myself a critique, like or critic, rather. I'm more kind of I'm more of an active observer of things. I know things that I think that are important that I should put out, and a lot of times people agree with me. But I have had some criticism from other people. A lot of people who have attacked my character, a lot of people who have attacked my relationship to my blackness, a lot of people who have who feel left out of, you know, the artists that I've posted on the blog, as if I could know everyone. It's just so ridiculous. It's so much pressure. And to an end, I give people my phone number all the time. I'm always open to have conversations with anyone. If you have a critique of what I'm doing, please let me know. I'm happy to field that conversation. And if people get argumentative, they get blocked. That's it. And that's why social media is awesome, because you kind of also have this ability to make those types of decisions where you can be really open and accessible, and then also just cut it off. You know, it's like a lot of my profiles are public, and so if you can't see it, you know I've blocked you. And so it's like there's also this other conversation. And what also I thought was really interesting that kind of got lost in the Yelp exchange, is this idea about saying things in person versus saying things online, and like the politeness of saying things online as opposed to just saying it as a person. Like, I feel very strongly that most of the things that I put out on social media, I feel very comfortable addressing people. And so I'm curious to hear from the other panelists more about like that idea of feeling more comfort in a comment section than at a coffee table. You know, it's like...
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Yeah.
Is there a break for you between online and offline discourse? Do you do certain things that you would do online that you wouldn't do offline? Is one more, quote, real than the other? These are questions I'm interested in what anyone has to say.
I mean, the thing that this makes me think about is a piece that I wrote recently kind of on this subject, because I was at a performance at the Whitney in the new kind of theatre space of a group called New Theatre, and a critic called Claire Bishop walked out halfway through the performance and turned round to the audience and said, you know, I'm leaving because this is really bad. And then you know, and no, and it was it was kind of shocking in a way, and then kind of reaffirmed it again by saying it's really bad, and then left. And no, you know, and I found this really interesting. So because I thought, like, whether I agree with her or not, and whether you know, whether that's a nice, let's say, whether that's a polite thing to do when there are people on stage, like when there's people on stage or not, is another question. But I thought that, you know, that was someone who thought that there was something at stake in saying something like this in person, who thought that like her audience is like this group of people in the room and this group of people on stage, and like, and you know, and that I do think maybe that's becoming a little bit more difficult, maybe in that, you know, it's like a safer space to say something online, and you know, than it is to kind of like stand up and say it to a room full of people. So I thought that was an interesting kind of disjunct, maybe.
Do you think she assumed people knew who she was in the crowd?
Yeah, I think she did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, back to this Jan Verwert point, the way he talks about criticism and gossip, it's really dependent on this opposition of writing to speech, and I think social media is interesting as a space where those distinctions get blurred, because so much of what's writing on social media is stuff that you just would say to people face to face. And also, what would you say in person or writing? I mean, I would never be at an opening and just spout out a 500-word review. I couldn't even do that. I mean, it takes me hours to write one. So I don't know if this is such a productive, line of discussion.
I'm interested in the Socratic method, I think, of what, right now, these tools that will be so antiquated in 10 years, and I don't agree with the last panel that said it will all be remembered forever. I happen to think in 10 years it will be gone, that the links are already dying. You cannot go to your own links. Go ahead and try. And I promise you the technology won't be there in 25 years to go find, MySpace, which was really cool for a while. But the model I'm interested in is a Socratic dialogic, is that what you guys call dialogic, where instead of the critic at the top of a pyramid speaking from the one to the many, it seems to me, and what I'm most interested in, polite or impolite, is could the many speak to one another coherently? Coherently, for me, is the key. That's why I, too, have rules on my Facebook. You can call me any name you want in the world, but you can't call somebody else an asshole. I have found that that's one good thing. I've got to watch boys more, because we mansplain like I'm doing. It's pathetic. We're a terrible gender. We should get out of the art world for just 20 years. Those are really simple rules. So you don't write something and somebody goes, asshole. They can call me that. And I only will block, and I have one other people I block because it's very personal for me. I hate cynicism. I despise it. Cynicism, to me, thinks it knows. Well, you know why Larry's showing Piotr Uklansky. You know why she got a review in Hyperallergic. You know why Ben Davis wrote on this artist. And I always want to go, do you know? Don't we believe in paradox, not certainty? And I like online because it's in live time, not in the studio. Right? And I'm interested, frankly, in performing live.
Performing live, yeah, that's
But
good.
only online. At home, I write like these people all day long. We have no lives. I have no life. I haven't gone out in months, years. Years.
Speaking of hyperallergic, I actually wanted to ask Brian about something. You sent something.
I didn't realize these emails were going to be read out loud.
This was a rough one.
I don't know. I mean, if you had said it to me, I could have quoted you just
Do
from
you
memory.
want it read out loud?
Well, I mean, I think we could talk about it. I mean, I was talking about how, this is back to what I was saying before about I don't think, art writing has been changed by the internet. I think there are new genres of art writing that have appeared, such as the sort of clickbait that appears on Hyperallergic, but, most people don't usually bother with that because it's so bad. So, and I kind of think that that's an addition to what's available, but it hasn't changed art writing as a whole, and we can be thankful for that.
Right.
I am curious, though, if it's changed for readers, the hierarchies. In other words, if you're on Facebook and people are sharing things or Twitter, you just get a link. You don't know if it's from Art Review, from Art in America, from Art Forum, from whatever. Everything has been leveled, and something like Hyperallergic, that's a very young publication, can get more, as much, if not more, attention than something like Art Forum. Because a link is a link.
But don't you look at the URL?
Yeah, it's also who is accessing these art links? It's people who know these publications.
Well,
People aren't
yeah.
just casually looking at Hyperallergic reviews. These are art world people who look at URLs. Yeah?
I don't understand the question.
No,
Of
I'm just
course they
saying,
do.
like, it's not like
Yeah.
people, I mean, like, my entire family is on Facebook.
Right.
And I share articles all the time. And, like, I know they're not looking at them. I know that people who are other art world people are the people who are accessing these things because they know the names and they're interested in it. It's like, if I share an article about Beyonce, I know my aunt's going to click through on it. If I share an article about, you know, Kara Walker, I know that my other art world people are going to click on it. It's not like everybody, like, we can't think that we're that important. Like, people don't give a shit about our stuff like that.
No, but what I mean is by hierarchies, I'm like, if you're interested in Kara Walker and you know who she is and you see her name in the title and you click through, you don't really care what the publication is. You're clicking through to an article on Kara Walker.
I'm not sure I agree.
You don't think
Yeah.
people click that through that way?
I think that it's just like the galleries. There might be 300 in New York. You go to one batch, I go to another. It's like a big shopping center. You don't. Everybody doesn't buy the same stuff. I like art blogs. I do most of my reading now online because I don't go out again. And I like it online. To be honest, I'm finding that it's erotic and intimate as holding a magazine used to be, where that smell of the magazine, to have it very close to you, to feel the clay-coated paper. I'm now getting that off my computer. Is that weird? It's like Kylie Jenner, or which Jenner was it that said it?
Kendall.
Kendall's
Kendall
much
Jenner.
smarter.
But don't you think that's maybe like the kind of publishing that Brian mentioned, like listicles and particularly like 10 artists to watch, the creation of these kind of articles is the kind of like, these are made for sharing. They're made for sharing on social media. They're made like, so there's like a nice big picture of the artist and, you know, whatever the URL is, you know, whether it's like artsy or whatever else, you know, that artist and all their friends are going to share this around, and, you know, you might not even really have to bother clicking through like on it. I've just totally undermined my own point then. But like,
Here's a good-
it's going to be shared. It's going to be shared and like potentially clicked through, and like these things have like a more affirmative zone of publishing has emerged through this, which maybe then you know, creates an environment which is maybe slightly more hostile to criticism, because everyone expects that any publishing is affirmative and positive and you know, demands like hearts and likes.
Likes. We only have likes, as we know. No one likes. But have any of you written one of those listicles? I'm curious. No. Who writes them?
Well, I think I posted some on BuzzFeed Community,
Okay.
but like as a joke.
No, but I think that this gets to is like those things are not written by critics.
I
imagine.
I think just to say, I think that there's this weird value system also where it's like you want to call these people idiots or something. Is that what you're trying to do?
No, absolutely not. I'm saying that I'm not sure they're paid or something. I mean, what I mean is the people who say that they're professional critics aren't writing listicles.
Look,
why is, I mean,
That's
But why
not
does
true.
the
Who is
listicle
writing
have
them?
to be such a bad thing? Like, I think about, too, like the ability to share. So
that's
if you
it.
share 10 amazing artists, then people have the possibility
fine.
to know 10 new artists.
I
and
didn't say it
that
was a
has
bad
value.
thing.
I'm
No.
just saying
Yeah.
that our world, in this room, people talk about listicles like they're the end of the fucking world.
Yeah.
And sometimes they can be really helpful.
They're
Because
fun.
people want points of access into the art world. And if that is through a listicle, I have no issue. If that's your primary
Amen.
contact, it's
I
no
don't.
problem.
All right.
No, amen. I don't write them. We're asked to do top tens. You're like running at 1,000,000 miles an hour in first gear when you're doing top tens. It's the worst thing to write a year, but it's interesting. And listicles, the people that do, fine. It is fun. Can't pleasure be an important form of knowledge? Are we all supposed to read 18-page text that none of us understand anyway, just to see if we're mentioned? No. I think, you know, I don't know. I think the messiness should just get. This is an end of empire time. That's how we're living right now. Okay?
that sounds hopeful.
I mean, it always
That's
is that
beautiful. The ends of empire throw up incredible things. Have you ever read Virgil's Aeneid? It's insane. And that's at the fucking fall of Rome. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, I mean, I think Laura made a good point that this kind of affirmative zone of publishing creates a hostile environment for like actual criticism, whether it's positive or negative. And I think that what, you know, art magazines do, wearing my Art in America hat, is like is creating some kind of discourse around an artist's work that's really valuable, and that's something that like listicles and Instagram really can't do. So.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that listicles are like inherently bad thing at all. I'm but I think that they're not what I identify with as a kind of like thoughtful critique, and they're not what I tend to. They're not what I tend to write. I mean, like the act of criticism, as in like spending a long time with like an artist's work. Like you're not going to get that relationship. You might have an access point like to an artist through a listicle, but you're not going to have like you're not going to read criticism through like on that listicle. Probably.
All right, we have only a quick 5 minutes left. I'm curious if, aside from listicles, if there's anything else people wanted to mention that hasn't been mentioned. Well, you can keep talking about listicles, that's fine. But is there anything else that is on people's minds that we haven't mentioned? We have 5 minutes left about the future of criticism and its relationship to changes in
Criticism
social
is
media.
not dead. We're not undertakers calling painting dead. Authors got called dead. Soon as women and people of color showed up in the art world, everybody said, the author is now dead. Okay? Nothing's dead. Nothing's in crisis. Things are in flux. Criticism, I think, will only get better, frankly, because more people have never written more or read more in the history of the world combined. And a lot of it's shit, the way 85% of the shows you see are crap. And I really think critics have to take matters into their own hands. My generations, we had to build this rock and roll city, okay? You're not going to get the jobs at our Forum. Like I said, I can't get a job there, or those other magazines. So, invent your own city. Don't you see how easy it is? If you build it, they will come. I promise you. I've never seen this fail, but whatever. Don't worry about money. Stop thinking about money. You're going to be poor for the rest of your lives. I promise. $3,000 in the only bank account I have. I'm not proud of that. I'm 1,000 years old, okay? This is not easy, and it's not going to get easier, so, woman up, man up. That's all.
I think to piggyback on what Jerry said, what that's really important is you have to also, it's like if it feels like work, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Because I think that there's a lot of these conversations around labor and social media and how Facebook is directly benefiting from our participation. And it's just like if you are exhausted by your Facebook presence, stop. Like don't do it. It's like I worked on my blog. I've been working on my blog for 5 years. I've never felt tired by it. I've never made a dime off of it. Not a single dime. Not a single grant. I mean, if you want to nominate me, I'm available. But like, also, I don't do it for that. It's like I do it because I feel like the work is important. And so if you feel like you want to put things out there, do it. If it feels taxing, don't. Like Jerry said, it's like it's not that rewarding. It's like you have to, have value on your own things and value on your own time. And if it feels like time well spent, do it so much more because we need it. But don't exhaust yourself.
Yes.
We're like one moment away from a GoFundMe campaign. For this thing. Anyone else? We have just a couple minutes, literally a couple minutes, if there's any last mentions of things that haven't been mentioned.
I'm good.
Good, all right.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You
you,
wanna
everyone, and
ask
I
us
hope that,
anything?
yeah.